It seems that in some places we still have an extraordinary aversion in the Church of England to talking about our faith in Jesus. I've said it before, and if you will forgive the analogy, it seems as if our faith is a bit like underwear. We're kind of glad that we've got it, but we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to make a big show of it, and we're certainly not going to share it with anyone else. I think some of this reticence dates back to the Enlightenment, that is, the period in our history stretching from the middle of the 17th century and all through the 18th century. It was a period in which huge changes took place in science, philosophy, society and politics. During that time, religion lost something of its place within the public arena, and faith became a private matter for individuals. So church became an awkward place where people practiced in public something that belonged in the private sphere. Now, I think that we have moved a long way from churches being rather odd gatherings of people who maintained either an embarrassed silence or a kind of church-going persona, a Sunday best. But now is the time for us to muster every ounce of confidence that we have, to reawaken our passion for spreading the gospel, and to be ready to speak of Jesus and what he means to us. Today's gospel reading is set in Caesarea Philippi, which was an incredible place, littered with the remains of worshipped Assyrian gods. Altars and temples were everywhere. It was also the centre of the worship of the god Pan. Even now it's called Banias, from its old name Panias. But of course in Jesus' day, Caesarea Philippi was dedicated to the worship of the Emperor Caesar. And dominating the landscape was a massive white marble temple built to his honour and glory. And so it was in Caesarea Philippi, with all its religious paraphernalia and the trappings of state control, that Jesus, a penniless carpenter's son from Nazareth, asked his disciples who they thought that he was. And still that question hangs in the air. Who is Jesus to you? And are you willing to talk about him with others, to introduce him to others as you would a friend? That is what the church is. It is a group of people who have met with Jesus, and in meeting Jesus want more people to meet Jesus. The church should be focused on Jesus and also passionate for the kingdom. Jesus says to Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Now that doesn't mean that Peter stands at the gates of heaven jangling his keys like some power-crazed security guard, letting in the good and the honourable and sending the bad to the basement. No, the keys allowed Peter to open the kingdom of God to the people he met. That day at Pentecost, when Peter preached the good news, thousands believed and were baptized because in his spirit-inspired preaching, he'd opened the kingdom of God to them. And throughout his ministry until his death, nailed upside down to a cross, he opened the kingdom of God to people. And the keys to the kingdom have now been given to us, so that we too can open the kingdom of God to others. Up and down the length of this country, this is what churches are doing right now. Feeding the hungry, meeting the needs of the poor, caring for the elderly, the sick and the housebound, mentoring young people, educating children, building community and proclaiming by word and by deed the good news of the kingdom of God. Do you know, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the publication of an extraordinary book called Believing in the Future by David Bosch. He wrote it as an essay in 1991 because he wanted, he said, to help the church understand its missional responsibility to a culture in crisis. And this is how he described things 25 years ago. We live, he said, in a self-producing, programmed and fully administered society run by giant industrial corporations under the direction of teams of technocrats. It is a totalitarian society, but its totalitarianism is hardly recognised, for it comes across as benevolent. Its presuppositions and spin-offs include centralisation, bureaucratisation, ecological damage, manipulation and exploitation of human beings, relentless consumerism, and chronic unemployment. It is a permissive society without norms, models, and traditions. An immediate society without past and often without future. People live utterly in the present and seek instant gratification. At the same time, he said, people in the West are inundated by a veritable deluge of information and entertainment, a circumstance that gives rise not only to a shattering pluralism, but also to the widespread pollution of the mind. He talks in the book of the Enlightenment, and he says that part of the problem is that people are still living and acting as if the tenets of scientific objectivity are completely intact and indisputable. And of course, we've changed. Tony Blair's advisor, Alistair Campbell, was wrong when he said we don't do God. Society does do God now. God has been brought out of the private and into the public sphere once more. So this is your chance, not just to swell the numbers, but to open the kingdom of God up to people. As David Bosch said in the book, mission is more than and different from recruitment to our brand of religion. It is alerting people to the universal reign of God. David Bosch concluded his little book with what he called the 5 ingredients of our mission to this culture in crisis. The first, he said, is that our mission must include an ecological dimension. The time is long past, he said, that we can afford to exclude the environment from our missionary agenda. Secondly, our mission must be countercultural. Jesus chose to have his conversation with the disciples in Caesarea Philippi with all its symbols of power because he was launching something that is deeply countercultural. Part of our mission, David Bosch said, will be to challenge the hedonism around us, inculcating something of the spirit of being resident aliens in the world. But as another missiologist, Mike Frost, reminds us, embracing a Christ-centered faith and lifestyle that are lived tenaciously and confidently right out in the open will require a dangerous departure from standard church practice. But you know, being countercultural is another way of opening the kingdom of God up to people. The third ingredient, David Bosch said, is that our mission has to be ecumenical. This pandemic and the fragility of some of our churches and organisations should inspire us to look for new and more effective ways of working together and pooling our resources. David Bosch said, mission to the West dare not be recruitment to our brand of religion, not only because the task before us is too immense to be credibly and effectively tackled by a fragmented church, but because the very nature of mission militates against this kind of ecclesiastical empire building. The fourth ingredient, David Bosch said, is that our mission must be contextual. Again, Mike Frost says, mission is provincial, it's local, it's indigenous, it grows in the peculiar ecosystems in which it is planted, and so it will taste and smell different in different settings. We have to do more to listen to our context, to be sentinels, people on lookout duty, especially out and about among the cultures that are not so well represented in the church. How do we reach those we have yet to reach? How do we open the kingdom of God up to them? And fifthly, David Bosch says a missionary encounter with the West will have to be primarily a ministry of the laity. Of course, the Church of England said as much nearly 3/4 of a century ago when in a report called Towards the Conversion of England, they said, "We are convinced that England will never be converted until the laity use the opportunities for evangelism daily afforded by their various professions, crafts and occupations. This being so," the report went on, "the Christian laity should be recognised as the priesthood of the church in the working world, and as the church militant in action in the mission fields of politics, industry and commerce." I think that's another way of saying that Jesus has given to the laity the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and that whatever you're doing, feeding the hungry, meeting the needs of the poor, caring for the elderly, the sick and the housebound, mentoring young people, educating children, building community and proclaiming by word and deed the good news, you are opening the kingdom of God up to people. This is a time of real opportunity as we take seriously our missional responsibility to a culture in crisis. God bless you.